Chapter 7. Jenny Jump. "Who is Scowbanger?" Grandma Alden repeated, smiling. "Why, he's the best-known person at Seagull Beach." "Is that his real name?" Pete asked. "It's his nickname, which he's had for many years." The elderly woman explained that the word Scowbanger meant a beachcomber. Only this particular Scowbanger was a combination beachcomber, fisherman, and treasure hunter. "He's a nice old man," Rachel put in, "and he has a funny beach buggy." "What's that?" Pam questioned. Rachel said that Scowbanger's beach buggy was an old car with oversized balloon tires. He drove it up and down the beach, looking for odds and ends washed in by the waves. "If you haven't been introduced to Scowbanger," Grandma Alden remarked, "you really haven't seen Seagull Beach. Rachel, you must take the Hollisters to his shack tomorrow morning." Rachel said she would like to, and so arrived directly after breakfast the next day. "Come on," she said. "We want to catch him before he goes out." "Wait a second," Ricky begged. "I have to put fresh water in my periwinkle jar." He ran down to the ocean, scooped up some water into the jar, and hurried back to place it in a shady spot on the front porch. Then all the children, including Sue, set off with Rachel. They walked along the beach a while, then Rachel led them between two huge dunes and started climbing one from the rear. Reaching the top, she pointed ahead. "There's Scowbanger's shack over there." The cabin stood by itself, with a fine view of the beach. The children quickened their pace and soon reached the homemade shack. It was a patchwork of driftwood, with 2 windows, a door, and a crooked little stovepipe chimney sticking out of the roof. Rachel knocked on the door, calling out, "Scowbanger, are you there?" "Sure am," a deep voice boomed out. The door opened and a tall, weather-beaten man stood before them. He wore white sailor pants and a blue shirt open at the neck. On his head sat a navy and white captain's cap, with a tiny gold anchor on the front of it. Scowbanger's thin, tanned face was covered with a fuzzy gray beard, and his eyes twinkled as he looked at the callers. "Well, well, Rachel," he said, "I see you brought me some new friends." He picked up Sue and set her on his shoulder. "Yo-ho-ho, and a band of pirates. I bet these are the happy Hollisters." Sue's eyes grew wide as saucers. "How do you know, Mr. Scowbanger?" "Good news travels fast," he replied, "and I get all the news." Sue squirmed to get down and said she would like to see Scowbanger's house. He set her on the ground and they all stepped inside. What a strange place it was. Odd-shaped pieces of driftwood lay everywhere. Beautifully colored seashells were fastened on the walls. Hanging from the ceiling was a faded white fishnet with little starfish dangling on strings from it. Pete spied a compass on top of a low table in one corner. It looked just like the one that old Mr. Spar had lent the children for their pirate play in Shoreham. Pete told Scowbanger the story of the lost compass. "Would you sell me this one," he asked, "so I can give it to Mr. Spar?" "That I'll do, me hearty," the man replied, "and I'll make it a bargain, too. I'm due to find another compass soon." Scowbanger mentioned the price, and Pete took several coins from his pocket. When the boy found he didn't have quite enough, he whispered to Pam, who gave him a couple more. The boy handed the money to Scowbanger and took the compass. "I'll take this to Mr. Spar as soon as I get home," Pete declared. When Ricky was sure he had seen everything in the beachcomber's shack, he said eagerly, "Will you show us your beach buggy, Scowbanger?" "And why not?" the man replied. "It's down at the foot of the dune." They followed him outside and down the far side of the dune. When they reached the bottom, there stood the funniest jalopy they had ever seen. It was an old-type automobile whose fenders and roof had been removed, and it had enormous balloon tires. "Oh boy, this is keen," Ricky shouted. "I call her Jenny Jump," Scowbanger said, patting the side of the beach buggy. That's because she can leap over sandy gullies like a frog. The Hollisters laughed as they walked around Ginny Jump. May we see it jump? Holly asked. That you can do, came the reply. Scowbanger turned to Pete. How about you taking Ginny Jump for a spin? Golly, that'd be super, the boy exclaimed. You mean I can run it? Easiest thing in the world. Just push or pull, depending on which way you want to go. The jalopy's owner explained that he couldn't be bothered with fancy gear shifts, so he had fixed this one to suit himself. Push that handle to the front and away you'll go, he instructed Pete. Then when you want to stop, just say, Whoa, Ginny, and pull her back like you'd rein in a horse. Scowbanger started the motor, which coughed and sputtered noisily, making the whole car tremble. Don't worry, he said. Ginny Jump is only shaking from old age. Pete hopped into the driver's seat and waved his sisters and brother to step aside. Here I go, he chuckled. Ginny Jump bucked a couple of times, then chugged off down the sand, gaining speed as she went. The ride was bumpy, but Pete thought this was fun. And Ginny did seem to jump the holes in the sand like a frog. When Pete had gone about a quarter of a mile, he turned the car in a big circle and headed back toward the others. As he drew near the spot, Pete reached down for the shift. Saying softly, Whoa, Ginny, he tried to pull the lever back, but it would not budge. Quickly, Pete steered the beach buggy to the right to avoid hitting the group. Wow, what'll I do? Pete thought frantically. He went up the beach in the other direction, then turned again. As he shot past Scowbanger, the old man cried, Stop, the others want to ride. I can't, Pete shouted back. He decided to turn again, but he cut too sharply. The left front wheel of the car hit a hole in the sand. Ginny Jump lurched violently. Pete knew it was going to overturn and flung himself from the driver's seat just in time. The old jalopy flip-flopped and landed upside down with the wheels still spinning madly. Scowbanger rushed up and stopped the motor. After jumping from the speeding buggy, Pete had rolled over and over on the beach, but now scrambled to his feet. Did I ruin your beach buggy? He asked fearfully. No. Now don't you worry, Scowbanger said. I guess Ginny Jump doesn't take to new riders. As the old man stroked his stubbly beard, Pete told him about the tight shift. Scowbanger smiled. Yeah, Ginny does freeze up once in a while, he explained. Well, children, we'll have to set her on her feet again. Grab one side here. 1, 2, 3, heave-ho! As the jalopy bounced back on its wheels, the beachcomber said, You've had your exercise for the day, Ginny, and added, What say we sit down and have a chat, boys and girls? Will you tell us about pirates and the treasures you've found? Ricky asked as they seated themselves. Scowbanger tilted his captain's hat back on his head and looked intently into the faces of the children. Now I'm glad you want to hear that, he chuckled. Once upon a time there were plenty of pirates in this area, and I'll bet you they left a great deal of treasure, too. Have you found any of it? Holly questioned eagerly. I reckon I have. I've collected everything from jewelry to old coins, Scowbanger replied. The pirates probably dropped them. The treasure hunter winked one eye and continued. But there's 2 ways to find treasures, the right way and the wrong way. I'm against diving down under the water to hunt for old wrecks. Let the sea give up her treasures when she will. The Hollisters were somewhat mystified by this and asked Scowbanger what he meant. Well, I let the sea work for me, he went on. When she's ready to give up her treasures, she'll do it, but not a second before. Sue looked up at Scowbanger and asked, Did the sea give up our green lighthouse stone? When the old man asked what she meant, Pete told the story of the emerald they had returned to Grandma Alden, and that she had said it was in the clay Scowbanger had brought her. The beachcomber said. That's a right good find. Pete asked Scowbanger if he would take them to the spot where he'd found the clay. "That I'll do," the old man replied, rising and stretching his long legs. "Follow me." He led them down the beach to another dune, where a big hole had been scooped out of its sandy side. "Here's the place that good clay came from," he said. "Too bad there's none of it left. You children might look around and see if you can find any more emeralds." "Oh, let's!" Holly cried eagerly. Digging with little sticks, they searched through the sand and pebbles. Finally, Holly shouted, "Look at this!" When her brothers and sisters and Rachel rushed up to her, they found that she was holding what looked like the lid of a brass box. On it was a design of flowered figures. "It's beautiful," Pam cried. "Maybe it's part of a jewel box." "Do you suppose the rest of it's hidden around here?" Ricky asked excitedly. "And emeralds are in it?" As he said this, a sound above them distracted Pam's attention. She glanced upward. At the top of the dune, she saw a head duck quickly out of sight. "Somebody's watching us," she told the others. Scowbanger's eyes snapped. "I'll bet it's one of those treasure hunters. They've been following me around for days, but I won't tell them a thing." "Let's chase that spy," Pete said determinedly. He climbed the dune quickly, with the others following. Pete was just in time to see a man disappear into a pine thicket. He raced after him. But in a little while the fellow was out of sight, and Pete gave up. As he turned back, Ricky and Scowbanger met him. "He got away," Pete reported. They walked back to the clay pit, picking up various members of the party on the way. Rachel had lost her sandal and was hunting for it in the shifting sand. Pam had stayed behind with Sue, who could not keep up with the others. As they all began to discuss who the eavesdropper might have been and whether he would dig for the jewel box, Pam suddenly looked around, her eyes taking on a frightened look. "Where's Holly?" she cried. No one knew. Pete climbed the dune and gazed in all directions. He called down that he could not see their sister. "Oh dear," Sue wailed. "Holly's lost."